So, a couple of weeks after the UK voted marginally to leave the European Union, if you can't see the writing on the wall yet, let me just give you a head count. Within 24 hours of declaring that the 23rd of June was going to be Independence Day.
If we vote leave and take back control, I believe that this Thursday can be our country's Independence Day.
Boris Johnson, the de facto leader of the Leave campaign, was saying how important it was to make sure that we were closer than ever to Europe.
In voting to leave the EU, it is vital to stress that there is now no need for haste, and indeed, as the Prime Minister has just said, nothing will change over the short term. And to those who may be anxious, whether at home or abroad, this does not mean that the United Kingdom will be in any way less united, nor indeed does it mean that it will be any less European.
That this Thursday can be our country's Independence Day.
We cannot turn our backs on Europe. We are part of Europe.
Indeed, there was so much backpedaling that if he'd been promising that stuff just 1 week earlier, you would have thought he was campaigning to remain in Europe, not being the de facto leader of the Leave campaign.
The second point I want to make is I've seen a lot of confusion over the weekend about the status of people living in this country. It's absolutely clear that people from other European countries who are living here have their rights protected. All that people want to see is a system that's fair, impartial and humane to all people coming from around the world.
Oh, what? You mean, Boris, we need something kind of like, what's the name of it? The European Union?
And also, obviously, people from the UK living abroad, living in the rest of the EU, will also have their rights completely protected. I just worry there's been a certain amount of confusion in the media over the last 24 hours. Thanks a lot, folks.
And a day or two after that, he had gone from the favoured new leader of the Tories, after, of course, the Prime Minister resigned, to announcing that he wasn't going to be running at all.
You who have waited faithfully for the punchline of this speech, and in view of the circumstances in Parliament, I have concluded that person cannot be me.
But I know what you're thinking. It's easy to predict these things with the benefit of hindsight. I mean, after all, everyone is a general after the battle. It would have meant so much more if you'd have actually said these things before he'd resigned. What, you mean like this? And the thing that's maybe remarkable about this footage is this is one of the lead Brexiters in his moment of triumph, his great moment of victory. And yet he has the demeanour of a broken man who has just lost the biggest battle of his life. You just had a load of confused Brexiters looking at each other with that gaunt expression of, dear God, we are so screwed. They were just empty promises. We never expected to win. People are going to lynch us when they realise that we only promised all of that stuff because we never expected to have to deliver on it. We never expected to win. Yeah, all that backpedaling couldn't have been more obvious. All of a sudden you had people like Farage saying, actually, yeah, we're probably going to need access to the common market after all. Oh, but you can't put a price on sovereignty, right? But the EU was going to make all the rules for us in some super state, right? You know, all that stuff about cucumbers and so forth. Well, sure, some of the rules the EU made were silly, but a lot more of them made sense. And honestly, can you really complain about all these oppressive laws that were stifling you within the European Union when you can't name a single one of them?
They're asking people to give up their sovereignty in the long term. That's the goal.
What sovereignty?
Okay,
Come on,
what
sovereignty? No, I want to know what sovereignty have you given up for the EU?
Okay, 50% of the laws are made by people I didn't elect.
Bullshit. Right, name one of them.
Well, just because I can't name one.
Male fantasy games or male fantasy objectification of women games?
Some of them, that would be an accurate title, yeah.
Give me some names. Name some names.
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
But like, what one specifically? I'm curious that you...
all of them, any of them that have...
In the work that I do, I look at hundreds of examples of video games, and I
you think of three? Can you think of three?
I can't.
Been in front of me over all these years. I have that.
But I think it's a bigger issue to talk about the industry as a whole and how it perpetuates.
I have a vast variety of sources where we get our news to.
These ideas of sexism and misogyny, as opposed to just Grand Theft Auto, for example.
And one of the rules that you cite, one of the ludicrous rules, and I quote, is an EU rule that says you can't recycle a tea bag and that children under 8 can't blow up balloons.
Well, may I say, Mr. Tyler,
could you tell me which EU regulation or directive says that children under 8 can't blow up balloons?
Yes, the European Commission's own website. I'll be happy to give you the number of the press release in a moment.
It says, Boris, and I've got the Toy Safety Directive requirements in front of me. It says, warning, children under 8 can choke or suffocate. And it's asking that this warning be placed on the packaging. It's not requiring or forbidding 8-year-olds.
It's requiring it to be placed on the packaging.
It's requiring a warning to be placed on the packaging. It's not prohibiting children from under 8 from blowing up balloons.
Well, I think even the European Union would be very hard put to invigilate people's households in such a way as actually to prohibit people from blowing up balloons, the people under 8 from blowing up balloons. Andrew, on your point about recycling tea bags, which you mentioned, there is, of course, and this is a classic example of gold plating. The EU Animal Byproducts Regulation of 2002 stated that stuff that had come into contact with milk or with meat could not be recycled. Cardiff Council decided to interpret the Animal Byproducts Regulation 2002 in such a way as to forbid people from recycling tea bags. Now, that is a classic example, in my view, of the confluence of EU legislation with overzealous British implementation, which we might call gold plating.
That we can perfectly well decide whether or not we want to implement it. It's not true, though, is it, to say that there is an EU regulation or directive that prohibits people from recycling tea bags.
It would
be true to say that some countries might have gold plated, or some councils might have gold plated, or some regional authorities might have, or assemblies might have decided. They are relying on EU regulation, as I say, Animal Byproducts Regulation 2002, which I seem to remember. I think there's a separate regulation that forbids you from burying your own sheep on your own ground. I seem to remember that's the animal hygiene regulation. Well, we haven't got into sheep yet, but
2001. There are myriad of these things, and they are taken and used by UK officials, however well-meaning, in such a way as to add greatly to the burden of bureaucracy.
Bullshit. Right, name one of them.
Well, just because I can't name one doesn't mean it's not true.
Oh, come on, for fuck's sake.
No, but this is what they say.
The EU is imposing all their horrible burdens on me.
The European Commission's
website. Flame retardant label on my chair. Yeah, right? If that is the imposition, if that is the freedom that you've given up, it's bullshit.
Look, that is the very beginning.
Now, these vapid populists were happy all the time they were preaching to the converted. Meanwhile, where are all these popularists who only hung around while the people were cheering?
When the shit hits the fan, some guys run and some guys stay. Here's Charlie facing the fire, and there's George hiding in Big Daddy's pocket.
Never to face the music of the wreckage of their empty promises. Well, when your esteemed leaders are the very first to desert the sinking ship, that should tell you something about the quality of their arguments or their belief in them. Not that any of these people are going to suffer. They're all mind-blowingly rich anyway. You know, people like Boris Johnson, member of the Bullingdon Club, you know, where their initiation rites included things like burning a £50 note, that's like $50 or something, in front of a homeless person.
And that, my friends, is called integrity. That's called courage. Now that's the stuff leaders should be made of.
It just makes you wonder if this whole Brexit thing was just some lark by the Bullingdon Club to play with the little people. But I know what you're thinking. It would have meant so much more if you'd have said beforehand that Brexit really wouldn't change Britain's overall position, but the change would cost the UK an arm and a leg.
So yeah, Brexit. For what tangible gain? The way I see it is a very expensive way. You've seen Red Dwarf, yeah?
Love it.
Yeah, you know, when Rimmer's repainting everything from ocean grey to military grey.
Mm-hmm.
Why? What the hell's the point of that? It's just a very expensive way of changing things from something to exactly... Something is a difference without a distinction, and it's just going to piss everyone else in the world off, which is about what you see. You take a look everywhere else in the world. No one else wants this because it's a sort of more or less pointless change.
Now, interestingly, over the last week or so, I've not heard a peep out of all those Brexiters who were so mortified by the slightly different implementation of democracy in the European Union to that of the UK. Now, I've not heard a peep out of them how the leading party is going to select 2 candidates for the next Prime Minister to be the leader of the country, and then only 2 people in every 1,000 will get a vote on which of those 2 people will become the next British Prime Minister. And you were bitching non-stop about how undemocratic the EU was. But when something like this happens, not a peep. Where only 2 people in 1,000 get a vote. And the average age of those voters is 59. And what? No attempts to change things. No referendum. No people even quitting. Yeah, it's odd how that selective outrage works, isn't it? Now, for me, I don't have too much problem with it. In the UK, it's just like the EU democracy. It's fit for purpose. But I'm not going to have some selective vision about how there are problems with the EU Parliament while ignoring those of the UK. However, I did enjoy the massive backtracking of every leader of the Tories. I mean, the whole thing was a complete farce to begin with. The Conservatives are always looking to spend less money on everything, which is sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad thing. But it's just hilarious. These people were taken in by the idea that if the UK managed to save 300 million a week, which of course they wouldn't, most of that 300 million a week was spent straight back on the UK for things like urban development or science or that sort of thing. The idea if they managed to save 300 million a week, they would suddenly spend it on the NHS was a joke.
The £350 million a week we send to the EU, which we will no longer send to the EU, can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim. That was one of the mistakes I think that the Leave campaign made.
Hang on a moment, that was one of your adverts.
Well, it wasn't one of my adverts, I can assure you.
Oh, really, Nigel? So you wouldn't expect to find, say, footage of a UKIP MEP giving a speech in front of that exact same sign, would you?
Do we want to be part of an insular, inward-looking, little 1950s little European bloc?
Shh! No one tell the UKIP MEP that tiny little backward European Union is the largest, or maybe second largest, economy in the world. I mean, he wouldn't want to let facts get in the way of his disinformation now.
Well, it wasn't one of my adverts, I can assure you.
Well, that was one of the Leave campaign's adverts, but that money was going to go to the NHS.
And I think they made a mistake.
I would like that 10 million to be spent helping the communities in Britain that your government damaged so badly by opening up the door for communist countries. And what people need here are schools, hospitals, GPs.
That's why many people have voted.
They made a mistake in doing that. But what I can tell you is we have a nice feather bed.
After 17 million people have voted for Leave,
yep.
Based, I don't know how many people voted on the basis of that advert, but that was a huge part of the propaganda. You're now saying that's a mistake.
But maybe you should just remind them how you shouldn't take anything a democratically elected politician says too literally.